Right.
Okay, so using sound reasoning today, we're going to start by introducing the two basic types of reasoning. The first one is deduction. So, reasoning sounds simple enough, right? We're using logic to draw conclusions from evidence. This is what I've been trying to get you guys to do since the informative speech. However, some of us did have some issues with this during the informative speech, so I really wanted to make sure that this was clear. In that we need to make sure that we're avoiding any sorts of errors in our reasoning or errors in our logic. Okay, so depending on what type of style of reasoning you're using, you may have different potential errors that you can commit, so to speak. All right, so deductive reasoning is going from general to specific. So it's taking a general rule or a general claim and trying to say that it applies to all specific cases. This might sound kind of familiar because the classic error of reasoning when it comes to deduction would be stereotyping, okay, assuming that all group characteristics apply to any individual. So kind of a classic deductive reasoning scheme is called a syllogism, where you go from a major premise to a minor premise and then a conclusion. When you put these together, okay, if you can come up with a deductive reasoning scheme where there's a major minor premise that ultimately leads to the conclusion, this is a really great form of reasoning because it's absolutely true no matter what. So if my major premise, I can get you to all accept that it is true. All humans are mortal. Yes, so far no one's been able to live forever. Okay, so everybody's going to die at some point. Sorry to break it to you. Okay, minor premise, Socrates is a human, or in this case, was a human. Okay, agreed, is a human being. Okay, or I could say any of your names, we would all agree, you're immortal. Therefore, okay, Socrates is immortal. Therefore, Socrates would die someday. Therefore, you will die someday. Okay, so if I can get you to accept that yes, the generalization is true. Okay, the major premise is the complete generalization, right? The minor premise is the specific case, the example of the general conclusion. If I can guarantee that both of those things are true and get you to agree with me, then the conclusion must follow. Okay. Unfortunately, most of our reasoning doesn't work this way. Most of it is not absolute, most of it is not always true. We generally are using inductive reasoning schemes. Okay, and induction, the more common form of the two, is going from a bunch of specific instances to ultimately make that general conclusion. Okay? Unlike deduction, induction never leads to a certain conclusion, only a very likely one. Right? Only a very likely one. So I make it, and this is what most of you will do. Okay, you're going to make these claims, and then you're going to find a bunch of evidence to support it. Okay, the conclusion or the claim that you want us to accept is going to be likely given the evidence. Okay, like based on the fact that, I could give you all these statistics on texting and driving and show you how it impairs your motor skills and impairs your ability to pay attention and all this stuff. I can tell you that, a good proportion of people who text and drive get in accidents. Therefore, if you text and drive, it is very likely that you will get into an accident. But is it a guarantee?
No.
No. Okay, so inductive reasoning does not lead to a definite conclusion. But depending on how well you do, how good your evidence is, how well organized your claims and logical evidence are, you might still be able to convince people that the likelihood is so great that I will get into an accident if I text and drive that I shouldn't do it. So, the model of logic that you're all generally going to be following is called the Toulmin model. Okay, and this is a sort of basic breakdown of how that model works. Okay, we have whatever claim it is we're trying to make. Okay, the claim, let's say, I'll go along with my texting and driving example again. Okay, the claim is, don't text and drive because you're going to get in an accident, you're going to hurt yourself, you're going to hurt people around you. Okay, that's my claim. Okay, that's my claim, right? My evidence is blank percentage of people who text and drive get into car accidents. Texting and driving causes more car accidents than drunk driving, etc., right? I'm going to give you all these statistics. The warrant is the reasoning, the explanation. Why does all of that evidence indicate that you're likely to get in an accident? Okay. So I would have to explain. I can't just give you all the evidence and give you the claim. This is the part that sometimes is missing. Okay, we have to explain the connection between the two. Sometimes it seems obvious, other times it doesn't. Okay, now the backing is your credible source. Where did that evidence come from? Where did that statistic come from? Who says? Why should I believe it? Centers for Disease Control, Wikipedia. What's the backing? What's the credibility? Then the qualifier is the likelihood or probability that based on the evidence and the credibility of the backing, okay, what is the likelihood that it will happen? So I could give you a presentation about texting and driving, I could give you a presentation about drunk driving, I could give you a presentation about speeding and driving, okay, and what is the likelihood of one versus the other, right, that you'll get in an accident? I don't know, okay, I would have to find the evidence to support whichever. Okay, but the qualifier is the likelihood. How nervous should I be about getting into an accident? If I do text and drive, what's the probability that that will happen? Finally, the rebuttal. Okay, the rebuttal. These are the exceptions. These are the counter-arguments, right? Okay, these are the counter-arguments. So let me give you a not very pleasant, but nonetheless, example here. All right, so my claim. Okay, now this is like I'm, let's say, a middle school teacher, and Billy, I've noticed that he's been coming into school with a bunch of bruises and that he seems to be a little fearful at school. So I say, maybe Billy's a victim of child abuse. That's what I'm thinking is going on here. Why do I think that? Well, these bruises and appearing fearful are typical warning signs of child abuse. Well, where am I getting this evidence and reasoning from? Well, my backing is a report by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services that I've been made aware of as a teacher, which is supposed to be looking out for these kinds of things. Based on my evidence, the credible backing, and the signs that I'm seeing, my qualifier is he probably is a victim of child abuse. However, it's possible Billy's it's not absolute, right? There are other things that cause bruises. There are other reasons Billy might seem fearful. It's possible that Billy is just an active kid who gets hurt a lot, falls out of trees, runs into doors, maybe he's really clumsy, I don't know. And maybe he's not so much fearful, maybe he's just a little shy, maybe he just started at a new school, right? Things like this. So even though all the signs are there, and even though I have decent backing and a good warrant and all that stuff, it's not a guarantee. Okay, it's not a guarantee. Now this is just a quick breakdown, okay, once again, of each of these parts to help really make sure this is clear, guys. So when you are putting together your arguments, your main points, okay, for most of you, you have an ultimate claim, right? Your ultimate persuasive goal. That's your ultimate claim. But usually within each point, you're going to have several other claims that speak to your larger claim, for which you need evidence for every single one, warrant for every single one of them. Okay, so what is your position or your argument? What is the information that supports that argument? Why does that information support that argument? You cannot forget the why part. Okay, what is the reasoning? Backing, source and source credibility. Qualifier, based on all of that, what is the likelihood? And the rebuttal, what are the counter arguments? What are the exceptions to the rule? Okay. To have a truly logically organized presentation, to truly present the best argument, you need all of these parts. You need all of these parts. Now from here on out, we're going to be looking at a lot of different examples and a lot of different potential errors. How can you make errors in logic where your evidence doesn't really support the claim or your backing isn't solid? So, I forgot the rebuttal. Okay, so we've spent quite a bit of time on this already, but here's just another quick little snippet. Okay, when I have a rebuttal, okay, what I'm essentially doing is refuting a counter argument, right? So an oral counterargument against a concept or proposition put forth by others. Okay, that's what you're addressing. The rebuttal addresses counterarguments. Okay. Your job is to refute those counterarguments with facts and evidence to the best that you can. Remember I said last class, okay, refuting counterarguments with facts and statistics versus just your beliefs is always going to be stronger. If I can provide concrete evidence from a credible source, a good backing, that is going to be stronger. And it's best to present both sides of the argument and then refute the opposing side. Now, court of law example. Let's say somebody is being accused of robbing a store, okay? And the lawyer's claim is, no, my client did not commit the robbery. Well, what's your evidence? Well, my client was in Miami from 6 to 8, and the robbery took place from 7 to 7:30 in Ocala. Okay, that's my evidence. Claim evidence, what's the warrant? What's the reasoning? So what would be the reasoning? Why does this evidence prove that the client didn't commit the robbery?
Because he wasn't in the location.
He wasn't in the location. Okay? You can't be in the same two different places at the same time. But beyond that, okay, just saying this isn't good enough, right? I have to actually prove that my client was in the other place, not in one. So how would I do that? Okay, so yeah, the law of physics, I can't be in two places at once, but how do I truly know that he was in one place versus the other? Well, maybe there's video surveillance. Okay, that would be solid backing. Versus something like, oh, there's credit card receipts that my client was in Miami. But what could I say as a rebuttal to that?
Someone else can swipe the credit card.
Someone else was using his credit card elsewhere. Okay, so the law examples are my favorite because I think that thinking about it like this is helpful to understand this idea of proving something versus not. Okay, now again, most of the time the probability is still a factor. Like sometimes we can't definitively prove our points, but we can make it a very likely conclusion. Okay, in this case, we can pretty much prove it. Another example, sun exposure lowers the risk of blood clots. Okay, that's my claim. Well, what's my evidence? Women who suntan had a 30% lower risk of suffering from blood clots. Okay, interesting. What's the reasoning there? Sunlight is a main source of vitamin D. Vitamin D aids in circulation and prevents blood clots. Backing, study published in the Journal of Thrombosis and Hemostasis, published in 2009. Okay, so the more vitamin D I get, presumably from being out in the sun, the lower percentage chance I have of suffering from blood clots. But what might be a counter argument to this? Cancer, right? Well, okay, so what, you're telling me I should go lay out in the sun all the time to prevent blood clots? Well, what's the trade-off? Okay, maybe my risk of skin cancer increases so much from being out in the sun, it doesn't matter that I have a lower chance of getting blood clots, right? Now, what if I told you that skin cancer rates absolutely will increase? Okay, and I said my evidence was that they found that there's ozone layers deteriorating. Why does that influence skin cancer rates? What's the warning?
The sun.
So someone let's, for the sake of my little video here, let's not all yell at it once. Someone raise their hand and tell me, why would it matter that the ozone layer was deteriorating? Sammy?
Because the ozone layer prevents the harmful UV rays from the sun.
Okay, the ozone layer is our natural protective layer against the harmful UV rays that hurt our skin and cause skin cancer. Okay, so that is my warrant. The ozone layer filters those UV rays. Okay, scientific reports prove that it's deteriorating. But does that guarantee that skin cancer rates will increase? What is a potential rebuttal or counter argument?
Use by protection when you go outside.
Okay. Awareness campaigns can educate the public about this potential harm, and we can then create our own barriers, such as sunscreen, hats, spend less time outside, etc. Okay, so my claim is not quite accurate. My claim should say skin cancer rates will probably increase unless. Okay, and the point of my presentation would probably be to encourage you to limit your time outdoors, wear sunscreen, etc. All right, so hopefully through those examples and explaining all those different parts, we now have a pretty solid understanding of what a logically constructed argument looks like. Okay, so remember your main points this time, you're not just being graded on how well developed they are, etc. It's the logical development of your main points. Does your evidence support the claim? Do you explain the connection via a warrant? Do you cite your sources and provide backing? Do you address those rebuttals, those counter arguments? Okay, so all of these components need to be there. If they're not, you might commit a fallacy, an error in logic, or an error in your reasoning. This is what happens when the evidence that you provide for starters, maybe you don't provide any evidence. Maybe you don't cite any sources. Maybe you don't actually give me evidence. Okay, but maybe you do, but that evidence doesn't warrant or doesn't justify your claim for some reason. Okay, and there could be lots of them. So, to check for fallacies, to make sure that we're not committing fallacies, this is essentially what we want to do. Okay? We need to provide evidence for every single claim and backing for that evidence. So a lot of you had this issue with your informative speech. The evidence was there, but you didn't tell us where it came from. And if I can't evaluate the credibility of the source of that evidence, then the evidence doesn't really matter, okay? Because you're not proving to me that the evidence is good. In addition to providing the credible evidence, you must explain the connection of the evidence to the claim. Even if it seems obvious, okay? Even if it seems obvious, explain why that evidence you're providing indicates that, yeah, you are more likely to get into a crash if you text and drive. Or, yeah, you are more likely to suffer from future diseases like obesity, diabetes, etc. if you don't exercise all the time. Every 40, whatever. So when this happens, you have an error in your logic. You've committed some kind of a fallacy, and you don't want to happen. So I'm about to throw up a slide with a laundry list of what's going to seem like a lot of fallacies. We're going to go through each one at a time. Okay, my advice to you would be to just kind of make sure you at least jot down each fallacy and what it is. Well, just jot it down, like the name of the fallacy. Okay, don't worry too much about hurriedly writing down all the definitions or whatever, okay, because you can easily look those up after the fact. But just kind of pay attention to the logic here behind each one. Okay. So, as I said, there's quite a few. Okay, your book goes over a handful. Okay, I picked a few more. So, the first two, okay, as I said, I'm going to go through each one. So the first two are errors that come from errors in deductive reasoning. Okay, errors in applying a general rule to all people, or all people who occupy a certain group, or, okay, so again, these are errors in generalization arguments. Okay, so we need to think about some things. Is the generalization well supported? And are there exceptions to the rule? Classic deductive reasoning error is stereotyping. Okay, assuming that because someone belongs to some larger group, they're automatically going to have the characteristics of that group. Okay, so just because I'm a woman, or just because you're a certain race, or just because you're a certain occupation, okay, you must be this way. So here are some examples. Now again, is the generalization well supported? Okay, can I show evidence? Can I find that credible backing that I'm looking for? Now, to say, again, the reason why these cannot be true is because we're making them absolute, right? All females are overly emotional. Now, you may very well be able to provide me with evidence that demonstrates that in comparison to males, females tend to be more emotional, more sensitive, etc. Okay, I don't doubt that that research exists. But to take that and say that all females are overly emotional, that's an error in logic. Okay? Just because it's a probability doesn't make it an absolute fact. Okay, it's not a certainty.
Also, overly emotional is subjective, right?
Sure. Okay, sure. Now, all Asians are good at math. Now, okay, I could very well show you some evidence and some research that shows you that students, especially from Chinese education system, tend to be better and more well-versed in higher level math than other nationalities. Okay? But that doesn't mean that every single Asian person is going to be good at math. Okay? So again, deductive reasoning, biggest issue we have there is assuming that because something is typically true or generally true, it would apply to every single individual case. Another example of deductive error reasoning would be the bandwagon. This is kind of related to social proof. Okay, just because that's what everybody's doing, that makes it the right thing to do. Or just because a large proportion of people do it, that makes it the good or right thing to do in some way. So anytime you hear these commercials or any advertisement in any way that preaches about the number of people who do something, use a product, go somewhere, okay, that's the bandwagon fallacy happening. So if I tell you that 44 million people used Nasonex last year, have I actually given you any good reason why Nasonex is a good product to use? Like, what if out of these, so right after they tell you that 44 million people used Nasonex last year, then right after that they have the voiceover where they tell all the horrible side effects, right? So how many of those 44 million people ended up getting chronic nosebleeds, or chronic migraine headaches, or whatever? Pick your favorite side effect, okay? So maybe of those 44 million, like 35 million of them never bought Nasonex again. I'd rather know that than just that 44 million people bought it in the first place. Okay? Now, if you say something to me like, oh yeah, we should totally check out this bar downtown, it's the most popular place in town. Okay, well, is that necessary? I mean, I don't know. Maybe I don't like the kind of music they play. Or maybe I'd rather be able to actually hear the person next to me when they talk. Or maybe I'd rather not get drinks spilled all over me all night. Okay, like, just because it's the most popular doesn't necessarily give me logical reasoning as to why I would go there. Okay. So those are the two that have to do with deduction, errors with generalizations to specifics. Now we're going to go the opposite direction. Okay, and that's where all the other ones come from. So whenever you're trying to use bits of evidence to prove a larger claim, okay, we have inductive reasoning happening. Now this could be either statistical evidence or examples. Okay, so individual examples or statistical examples. Okay, because even statistics, guys, remember, are still just larger examples, right? A statistic is based on a sample, right? When I say that 50% of Americans are seeming like they're leaning towards voting for candidate X, I didn't ask half the people in the country, right? I'm still only basing it off of an example group or a sample group. Okay, so questions we need to ask. Number one, is this example relevant? Is it actually related? Okay, are there enough examples, or am I only giving you one or two? Is the example typical or representative, or is it not normal in some way? Okay, and are there counterexamples? Are there alternatives? So if I claim that smoking and lung cancer don't have a relationship, like smoking doesn't cause lung cancer, smoking doesn't lead to lung cancer, well, what makes you say that? What's your evidence? Well, my uncle smoked 2 packs of cigarettes for 25 years, 2 packs a day, 25 years, and he never got lung cancer. So smoking doesn't lead to lung cancer. Now, you need to be careful about my wording here, because if I said smoking doesn't cause lung cancer, that would be true. We'll talk about that again in a second. Okay, but what's wrong with this evidence? Nisha? It's just, right, it's just one person now. If I use this example and I showed you statistical evidence that showed that the majority of people who smoke don't get lung cancer, that if I could find a sample of smokers, let's say 150 of them, who all smoke 2 packs a day for 25 years, and hardly any of them or none of them got, now I'm talking, okay? Now I'm giving you evidence. But I can't just use the example, okay? It's relevant, but it's not enough, and it's not, probably not, I'm not positive about this, but I'm guessing it's probably not typical, it's probably not representative. Okay, your uncle's just a lucky son of a gun. Okay? So, hasty generalization is what we're getting at here. Claim based on either insufficient evidence, there's just not enough, or the evidence is non-representative, it's not typical in some way. So, if my claim is college dropouts make more money than college graduates, and my evidence is, well, my friend dropped out of college and they make more money than me, and I graduated from college, of which I have quite a few examples. Okay, so, nonetheless, that alone is insufficient, right? I would also need to provide statistical evidence that showed that in some capacity, the majority of people who do not graduate college make more money than the people who do. Which hopefully for all of our sakes is not the case. Okay. Now, what if I said, well, Bill Gates is a college dropout, and he's like the richest guy in the world, or close to it. I'm not sure if he's fallen off the throne here. But, so, what's wrong with that example? Okay, so number one, it's still just one example. But also, is Bill Gates like comparable to the average person?
No.
Not so much, no. Okay, we could argue he's like a freak genius of epic rare proportions. Okay, so not normal. Okay, he is a non-typical, non-representative example of the average person. So that would not be good. Now that doesn't mean that you can't mention both of these things. But you have to give the other more representative evidence as well. Okay. Arguments using opinions. Basically, you either have no evidence, okay, or your evidence is based in some kind of false authority. So this is if you have non-credible sources. Okay, your source material comes from a non-credible place, whether it's a non-credible person, non-credible organization, non-credible website. Okay, that's why you've always got to ask, what are the expertise? Is there reliability with this expert? Do they continually give good information? Okay, and is there any bias? Does this person or organization have a vested interest in saying this information? Okay, is somebody paying them to say it? Do they get kickbacks if they prescribe a certain pill, etc.? Now, one thing to be careful of, okay, is that, and this is like the classic political move, right, an ad hominem attack, and it's diverting attention away from the issue by putting attention onto the person. Okay, so no, we shouldn't elect this person for president because, he cheats on his wife. Okay, well, all right, maybe we morally disagree with that, and yeah, okay, that's kind of a crappy thing to do, but does it necessarily make you a bad politician? Does it make your policies bad? Does it mean that you can't handle foreign affairs? Does it mean that your economics aren't, they're not related. Okay, however, obviously these things are influential, but nonetheless, okay, this is technically a fallacy of reasoning. It's not relevant to the actual issue at hand. It's not relevant to the actual issue at hand. Unsupported assertion is literally just an opinion. Okay, don't eat yogurt. It's bad for you. Why? I just think that yogurt's bad. I don't think yogurt's bad. Maybe the other day, for the record. But okay. Although eating lots of dairy is inflammatory. So So, no evidence is given, okay, unless it's an expert authority's opinion, in which case we would have to demonstrate that they were an expert, their credentials, etc. Now, cause and effect. Cause versus correlation. Sometimes we can mix up that there is a relationship between things, but the relationship is not necessarily a causal relationship. Okay? So, there can kind of be like two things happening here. One, doing one thing makes something else more likely, but that doesn't mean it causes it. Because in order for something to cause something else, it has to happen every single time. Or, there's some third variable that's influencing both things, thus making them related, but one is not directly influencing the other. Okay? Don't worry, I have examples. Okay? So, false cause, okay, would be thinking that just because one thing happens right after another, one caused the other. Okay, so I always eat Oreo cookies and study for exams, and I always get good grades. So my Oreo cookies must make me smarter. They must make me get good grades. Or maybe it's because you studied. I don't know. Just a thought. Okay, superstitions are a classic form of false cause. I walked under a ladder this morning, and then I got in a car accident. Oh my gosh, walking under the ladder caused bad luck, and that's why I got in the car accident. Or I crossed paths with a black cat, or I broke a mirror, or whatever. Okay. I was watching a show last night where, it was the lady and she was like, oh, well, she was trying to say that, she's like, there is evidence. She's like, I have to believe in a higher power, and my evidence for that is that, I prayed when I got here today that I would find a parking spot, and as soon as I pulled up, there was a parking spot. Now, this is not to say that there's anything wrong with having faith or believing in God or anything like that, but it's very possible that the parking spot could have been there anyway. Even if, so just because one thing happens and another thing happens doesn't necessarily mean that they're causally related. Slippery slope is another example of this. Okay, so one thing leads to another thing, leads to another thing, leads to another thing, ultimately leading you to blame the original thing for the ultimate cause, right? So here in this example, my life is going to be ruined if you don't loan me $5 to put gas in my car. So at first you're like, what? How do we get from one to the other? Okay, well, I need $5 to put gas in my car so I can make it my job interview. Because if I don't get that job, I'm going to lose my house and then I'm going to be homeless. So if you don't loan me this $5, you are going to ruin my entire life. Okay, again, lots of other factors at play here. Like, for example, if you knew you had this really important job interview, maybe you should have made it a point to go get gas in your car yesterday, not leave it till last minute, something along those lines. Okay. So slippery slope. Now, mistaking correlation for cause. This is what I was getting at with the first bit. Okay, so I'll start with the bottom one. Smoking causes lung cancer. Something cannot cause something else, once again, unless it happens every time. Does every single person who smokes cigarettes get lung cancer?
No.
No. Okay, so we cannot say that smoking causes lung cancer. Now, we would have to get more specific than that.
Yeah.
Maybe I could create a study, and obviously the amount of smoking and the amount of time that you smoke for is going to be influential. So maybe there's a study that shows that if you smoke 2 packs a day for 25 years, you always get lung cancer. I don't know. If that's true, then we could say that smoking 2 packs a day for 25 years causes lung cancer. But I can't say just smoking causes lung cancer, because it's not happening 100% of the time. But there is a correlation. Okay? If you smoke cigarettes, you are X% more likely to get lung cancer. Okay? There's a correlation. They affect one another directly. There's a direct correlation. Okay? Positive. One goes up, the other goes up. Now, what if I say that eating ice cream causes drowning? And I'm basing that on this evidence. When ice cream sales go up, drowning rates go up. Now, the evidence is true, but my conclusion is wrong. What other thing might be going on here that would make this evidence true, but the claim is false?
Summertime.
It's summertime. It's hot outside. So when it's hot out, ice cream sales go up. And when it's hot out, we're more likely to go swimming. If we're going swimming, then we're more likely to drown. Versus if we're not going swimming, we're not likely to drown, right? Because we're not in the water. So those two things, eating like high ice cream sales and drowning rates, are correlated. When one goes up, the other goes up. But they're not, there's no direct relationship between the two. Versus this example. Okay, there is a direct relationship between smoking and lung cancer. There's not a direct relationship between eating ice cream and drowning. I'll wait 30 minutes, I already...
No. If you were eating ice cream and the ice cream melted and you drowned in the ice cream, you would at least die happy, which is good.
How did I miss that point?
Yeah. Low-hanging fruit, obviously.
Okay, so what about the last one up there? Now this one is not as obvious, and I'm going to prompt you by saying that there is a third factor here. It is not like that because you're in the car, you're not exposed to the sun. Okay, but people who wear seatbelts have a lower incidence of skin cancer. So the more likely I am to wear my seatbelt, the less likely I am to get skin cancer. There's not a direct relationship. What's the third factor here that we're not seeing? Kaylee?
People that wear seatbelts tend to be safer, so they're more likely to put on sunscreen.
Okay. People who are generally more cautious, okay, are going to be more likely to take precautions to avoid harm, right? So if I'm more likely, now, and then I had somebody last time, well, I never wear sunscreen, but I always wear my seatbelt. Well, okay, well, maybe you're not a normally cautious person, then maybe you have a specific reason that, you always wear your seatbelt, but maybe, you're not as, versus me, I'm hyper aware of both of those things, okay, but nonetheless, okay. So, correlations can come in a couple of the two things can still be directly correlated but not causing one another. Okay, they can still also have some kind of correlation or relationship, even if it's not direct. There could be a third factor, like it's hot outside, it's the summer, or I'm a cautious person, so I'm more likely to take precautions in all things that I do. All right, statistical stuff. Okay, so a couple things to think about here. These are all the different kinds of statistics that you guys are going to be most likely to be using. Okay, so I want to just bring attention to averages for 1 second, just in the sense that realize when you read something that says on average or gives you an average in some capacity, what kind of average are they talking about? Because there's 3 different kinds. And there's issues with all 3 of them. Okay, so the mode is just the most frequently occurring. So let's say I wanted to get the average height of everyone in the class. Okay. So the mode would be, oh, well, it turns out that 6 of you are 5'8", and that's the most frequently occurring height in the room. So I'm going to say that on average people are 5'8". That's a legitimate way to get an average. Okay, or I could line you up from shortest to tallest and point to the person in the middle, and whatever that height is the average. That's the median, okay, the one in the middle. Or the most typical one, I think, that we most commonly associate would be the mean, which is where I take all of your heights, I add them all up, and then I divide by the total number of people. Typically, the mean is thought to be the best in the sense that it's the most representative because it takes every single person's height into account, unless, let's say right before I do that, Shaq and LeBron James walk into the room, okay, then we have outliers, or people who are non-representative, atypical examples, because they would be freakishly tall, right? So then at that point, what number I would have had would be higher, because those 2 people would have thrown off the middle value, the mid-range or whatever. Okay, so a couple things to think about with averages. Now when it comes to percentages, correlations we just spent quite a bit of time on. Okay, percentages, okay, we want to think about things like, well, where did the percentage come from? Okay, 80% of dentists recommend Crest. Well, how many dentists did you ask? Did you ask 10? Did you ask 100? Did you ask 1,000? Because 8 out of 10 isn't really that high, but 80 out of 100 might be a little bit better. 800 out of 1,000, a little bit better. What are the percentages based on? Okay, is the sample representative? If I say that, like there was some, I think that, what was it? There was an example about skin cancer rates, but the sample came only from Florida and California. And then the claim was made, a student did this in one of their speeches. So the study was based in Florida and California, and that's where the sample came from. And then they tried to say that in the United States as a whole, skin cancer rates were here, right? But in Florida and California, skin cancer rates tend to be higher than they are in some other states, okay, because we live in a sunny place, right, where we're more likely to be outside and be in the sun, versus if we live somewhere where it was cloudy and rainy or winter half the year or whatever. Okay, so is the sample representative? If I'm talking about the whole country, then my sample should come from the whole country. Okay. So that's the issues we run into here with statistics. Poor sampling, or a misuse of average. So if I say stress is a serious problem in our country, well, I'm stressed and most of my friends are stressed. Okay, that's not a good sample. It's a small sample. Okay, and I don't know, maybe there's something about you and your friends that you guys are just really stressed out. I don't know. Okay, but if I make say the evidence is, well, according to a national survey by the American Psychological Association, in which they took a survey of near 2,000 individuals from around the entire country. Okay, still 2,000, you're like, well, that's not that much, but sure is a heck of a lot better than I'm stressed and most of my friends are stressed. Okay, so we want to make sure that the sampling is actually representative of the population that you're making a claim about. Okay, which is why I keep constantly telling you guys, find evidence about college-age students or people in college, right? Because that sample is representative of college population as a whole and might apply to the people in this room that you're talking to. All right. So guidelines for using stats, we've kind of talked about a lot of this stuff already. Okay, but so when I say use fairly and honestly, again, I mean, if you're saying something like, right, that one sample speech we saw, well, there's been a 50% increase in cheerleading-related emergency room visits in the last year. That's a huge number. Clearly, cheerleading-related accidents are on the rise. Well, how many were there to begin with? Okay, or there's been a 50% decrease in unemployment. That's amazing. That's huge, right? Like this president's doing a great job because employment's decreased by 50%. Well, where was it to begin with? How big of a jump really is that 50%? Okay, so don't misrepresent your statistics. Also use them sparingly. When I say that, I don't mean don't tell us lots of statistics. I mean, don't just sit here and say 50%, 35%, right, and just list off all this stuff. The brain cannot process that sort of information quickly, okay, and it's difficult to relate multiple statistics together in a meaningful way. So what can we do about that? Use visuals, okay, line graphs, bar graphs, pie charts to help us understand the statistics, and also translate those statistics into vivid, meaningful language to maximize the impact. Intersperse the statistical evidence with some of that pathos, with some of that emotional evidence. Okay, also, round off long, large numbers. You saw just a second ago on the last slide, I didn't say 1,842, I just said nearly 2,000 participants, right? And adapt stats to your particular audience. So this would be the kind of thing where, right, I'm going to say then, if X% of the population is likely to suffer from diabetes at some point in their life, that means that out of the 25 people in this room, it's likely that 2 or 3 of you are going to be affected by diabetes, right? To break it down and make it a more manageable number for your audience. And relate statistics to familiar objects. So classic example would be like relating something to say that's about the distance of, texting a driving speech is a common one you hear. Like if you look down for 5 seconds and then look up, you've just traveled the distance of 3 or 4 football fields or something like that. Okay, so putting it versus saying this many feet. It's like, well, how big is that? Like, I don't know. Well, it's about this many football fields. Well, okay, that's a lot. Okay. Using the familiar to explain the unfamiliar. All right, couple other ones, and then we're done with this. All right, so arguing in a circle, begging a question. This is basically, again, kind of one that's using opinion. It's when you, my favorite example of this is when you look up a word in the dictionary and it uses the word you're looking up to define itself. Okay, that to me is a classic example of arguing in a circle. So you shouldn't eat hard candy. Why? Well, eating hard candy is bad for you, so it's unhealthy, and you shouldn't eat it. So my evidence is it's bad for you, and how am I proving it's bad for you? Well, it's unhealthy. I mean, how is that any different than just saying it's bad for you, right? I'm just, the same idea. Okay, it's the same idea. Either or. This is my favorite. We make it seem like there's only two options. Okay, there's only two options. Well, we either have to raise tuition or cut class offerings, because there's no other way we could ever possibly raise money other than by charging you guys more to go to school. Okay, or either I pay for a personal trainer or I'm never going to be in shape. Because there's no other way. Every single person who's ever been in shape before has had a personal trainer, right? There's no other way. The red herring. So this is one that, it's basically like the ad hominem, attack on a person. You're diverting attention away from the actual issue. But this can work sometimes. So by presenting like another argument that's completely unrelated, okay, but still kind of does make a point. So if I say handguns cannot be banned, handguns are banned, fatty foods should be banned because more people die of heart attacks than by shootings. And let's say I provide you the evidence that shows that heart disease and heart-related issues, heart attacks, kill far more people than shootings do every year. And so I say, so paying attention to guns and stuff, well, we shouldn't be doing that. We should really focus our attention on, but that doesn't address the issue that people are still dying from senseless gun death, right? I mean, that doesn't address that issue. So although, yeah, okay, you're making a good point, maybe we should pay more attention to fatty foods, but that doesn't actually have anything to do with the issue we're talking about. Again, this is like the classic politician move. Classic. This is like all politics is. Just kidding. All right, the only other thing, guys, so those are all the fallacies. I just wanted to remind you about these different patterns of organization. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on it, but really I probably should have talked about this last class, but we talked about it a little bit as I was going through your topic sheet stuff with you guys. Okay, so it's just thinking about different ways to set up your arguments. Okay, so the first one, statement of reasons, is basically a variation of the topical pattern. Okay, like, so you're basically just saying, claim, I want you to stop texting and driving. I want you to start exercising. I want you to insert your topic there. Okay, and then you basically, every point is just a reason, okay, or evidence. So every single point is evidence to support your claim. So this is especially helpful. Now, one thing that this pattern, the reason why this pattern doesn't quite work for us is because it doesn't address counter-arguments. Okay, so that's why it's really helpful if you're speaking to an audience who for the most part agrees with you, but maybe they're not like, they just need that little extra push. They need a little bit more evidence. They're not 100% there. But this type of argument isn't good when you've got people in the audience who disagree with you, because you need to address their counter-arguments. You need to address the competing ideas. Okay, the other one would be, problem solution. Okay, so point number one would be establishing that there's a problem, right? Showing me the statistics and the evidence and the cases, etc., that show that there is this problem. Then I'm going to describe the solution to the problem. Okay, then point three, I don't know, maybe in point three I'm addressing counter-arguments. Maybe in point three, I'm showing you an example of a person, or maybe I'm going to say that we have a huge problem with healthcare, and I'm going to describe all the things that are wrong with our healthcare system. And then in point two, I'm going to propose a solution to that problem. And then maybe in point three, I'm going to give you an example of another country or another government where they already have that kind of healthcare system I'm proposing, and show you that how well it works. Okay, so problem solution, maybe I address counter-arguments, maybe I give another example. Monroe's motivated sequence, this one kind of matches with the way I have you set up your outlines, right? So we start with some kind of attention grabber in our opening. Then we basically have like a mini problem solution in here. What is the need or the problem? What is the satisfaction of that need, or what is the solution to the problem? And then kind of like what I just described, visualization. Let me show you an example of a place where this is already working. Okay, and 5, action. Specifically, what do you want me, the audience member, to do? Okay, these are all in your book and describing, so don't worry if you're not quite getting all down. Comparative advantages. Okay, this is where we're comparing and contrasting potential solutions and then advocating for one of them. Okay, so maybe I want to compare the economic policies of 2 presidential candidates. Okay, so I'm going to describe the first, describe the second, and then in the third point, I'll compare and contrast and ultimately advocate for one or the other. Last but not least, the refutation pattern. Okay, in some sense, all of you will be doing some form of the refutation pattern, although it may not be quite this in depth. So some of you might only have 1 or 2 counter arguments where you address all of them in a single point. Okay, or maybe you start off stating the opposing argument in your introduction, and every single point is refuting that counter argument. Okay, or maybe main point 1, which many of us have this kind of form. State the counter argument, state the opposing position, explain why the opposing position is not good, introduce your position, and then explain why it's better than the other one. Okay. Or we could do something like, here's a misconception, here's the evidence against it. Here's the misconception, here's the evidence against it. Here's the misconception, here's the evidence against it. Okay, this type of argument is great because you are being inclusive, you're addressing your side and the other side, okay, versus just only talking about like a statement of reasons where I just say, here's why my side is the best. Yeah?
Can you use more than one pattern or stick to one?
I mean, in a sense, there could, like I just mentioned, right, how Monroe's motivated sequence sort of has a little mini problem solution within it. So it's not, they're not completely mutually exclusive. I mean, even if you have a statement of reasons, you could still address counter arguments in there, right? So no is the short answer to your question. You don't have to like pick one and stick to it perfectly. Okay, there's more than just this. Any other questions? That does it for the lecture portion. Can you click stop on that, please?
Wait, is the square the square?
Yeah.